Imagine you are sitting in the boardroom of a large company. On the screen in front of you is a possible acquisition. The price is $1 billion. 10 years ago, analyzing a decision like this could consume thousands of hours. Investment bankers, lawyers, accountants, strategy teams, industry experts, executives, people building models, checking contracts, studying competitors, forecasting demand, testing assumptions, and trying to understand everything that could go wrong. Now imagine an AI system can coordinate much of that work in minutes. It reads the contracts, it analyzes the financial statements, it studies every major competitor, it searches the market, it runs thousands of scene audios, it identifies regulatory risks, it challenges its own assumptions. It asks specialist AI systems to attack the deal from different directions. Then it brings everything together and gives the board one recommendation: buy the company.
And maybe generating that recommendation eventually costs almost nothing.
Exactly. Maybe not literally 1 cent today. That is not the point. The point is that the cost of producing sophisticated analysis could collapse compared with what it once cost. Intelligence gets cheaper. Coordination gets cheaper. The company can assemble enormous analytical capability around one decision without assembling an enormous human team.
But the acquisition still cost $1 billion.
There it is. The analysis becomes cheap. The consequence doesn't.
And that distinction is where this episode begins, because somebody still has to authorize the transaction, somebody still has to transfer the money, somebody still has to sign the documents. And if the AI is wrong, if the assumptions fail, if the acquisition destroys $500 million of value, that loss does not become virtual just because the intelligence behind the decision became cheap.
The AI can generate another recommendation. The company cannot generate another $500 million as easily.
Right. And that gives us a question that I think becomes more important as AI gets better. What happens when the decision becomes cheap, but being wrong doesn't?
That question is much harder than asking what AI can do.
Much harder. Because most of the AI conversation is still organized around capability. Can AI write the report? Can it analyze the company? Can it create the software? Can it negotiate? Can it plan? Can it manage a workflow? Can it make a better prediction? Those are important questions. But capability is only one layer of an economic system.
And we spent the last episode looking underneath that layer.
We did. In the first part of this series, we explored the coordination cost collapse. The idea was that AI may not merely make individual work cheaper. It may make organizing specialized intelligence cheaper. If AI systems can divide objectives into tasks, route work, transfer context, monitor dependencies, verify outputs, and escalate exceptions, then one of the hidden costs inside companies begins to fall: the cost of coordinating the work.
Which means a small team may eventually control levels of productive complexity that once required a much larger organization.
Yes. But at the end of that episode, we reached another question. If intelligence becomes cheaper and coordination becomes cheaper, what doesn't become cheap?
And the easy answer would be to make a comforting list: human creativity, human empathy, human judgment, human strategy, human intuition.
We are not going to do that.
Good, because history has not been especially kind to sentences beginning with "a machine will never be able to."
More importantly, those are all capabilities. If the technology keeps improving, capabilities are precisely where we should expect continued pressure.
Exactly. Creativity might remain important, but that does not prove it remains scarce. Judgment might remain important, but parts of what we call judgment may turn out to be pattern recognition, simulation, or prediction that machines can perform extremely well. Strategy may matter enormously while the cost of producing good strategic options collapses. Even empathy has two different meanings. There is actually sharing another person's experience, and there is producing a response that another person experiences as empathetic. AI does not have to solve the first problem to compete economically on the second.
So we should not build the future around whatever humans happen to be better at. in August 2026.
Exactly. That would confuse a temporary technological gap with a structural scarcity, and those are completely different things.
A temporary scarcity exists because something is difficult with today's technology. A structural scarcity exists because the constraint comes from somewhere deeper: physics, law, institutions, biology, ownership, social relationships, or irreversible consequences.
Give me a simple example.
Energy. Suppose an AI becomes 10 times smarter tomorrow. That does not automatically create 10 times more electricity. Better intelligence can help us design power systems, optimize grids, improve batteries, discover materials, and use energy more efficiently. But the electrons still have to come from somewhere. Intelligence can attack the constraint. Intelligence is not the same thing as removing the constraint.
And our billion-dollar acquisition is another version of that.
Yes, the AI can make the analysis cheaper. It can make coordination cheaper. It might even make the decision better. But the $1 billion remains a real claim on real resources. If the decision fails, somebody's capital absorbs the loss.
Which suggests a useful distinction for the entire episode. Capability is not consequence.
That is the first principle. Capability is not consequence. And once you separate them, the AI economy begins to look different.
Because if capability becomes abundant, the valuable thing might be whatever sits on the other side of the capability.
Exactly. Imagine that every company can generate 100 strategic plans before breakfast. Strategy generation becomes abundant. What becomes scarce? Maybe knowing which facts are actually true. Maybe the authority to choose one plan. Maybe the capital required to execute it. Maybe the willingness to accept responsibility if it fails. Maybe the trust required to get thousands of people to follow it.
And some of those constraints may actually become more important because the plans became cheap.
That is the deeper possibility we are going to investigate. AI abundance may not simply leave a few old scarcities behind. It may manufacture new scarcity.
That sounds backwards.
It does at first, but think about information. If producing convincing reports becomes almost free, we get more reports, more analysis, more claims, more images, more video, more code, more evidence, more recommendations. Now ask, what becomes valuable?
Knowing which of it is real.
Exactly. Cheap generation can increase the value of verification. Or imagine autonomous AI systems making millions more decisions across an economy. Decision-making becomes cheaper, but every consequential action creates some possibility of loss.
Which can increase demand for accountability, insurance, governance, and entities capable of absorbing that loss.
Right. Or consider authority. Suppose AI can generate a medical recommendation better than the average human. That does not automatically answer who is legally permitted to prescribe the treatment. Suppose an AI produces a brilliant legal judgment. That does not automatically make it a judge. Suppose it identifies the perfect acquisition. That does not automatically give it the authority to spend the company's $1 billion.
Ability to decide and the right to decide are not the same thing.
Exactly. And that may become one of the strangest features of the AI economy. The intelligence required to make a decision can become abundant, while the recognized authority to make that decision remains scarce.
Then there is accountability. Even if the machine produces the decision and another machine verifies it, someone or something still has to stand behind the action when the consequences become real.
So this episode is really asking where the bill eventually lands.
In part, yes. Where does uncertainty terminate? Where does liability terminate? Where does authority terminate? Where does the physical constraint appear? Where does somebody have to put real capital, reputation, legal standing, or trust behind an action?
That is a much less comfortable question than asking which human skill is safe.
And I think it is much more useful because we do not need to predict the final ceiling of artificial intelligence. We do not need to know whether AI becomes better than humans at creativity, strategy, persuasion, design, diagnosis, coding, or management. We can ask a different question.
When this capability becomes cheap, where does the constraint move?
Exactly. That is the method. Don't start by protecting today's scarce skill. Follow the constraint.
Which means We're going to attack some of our own assumptions in this episode.
We have to. We will ask whether human judgment really remains scarce, whether trust can be automated, whether verification can be handed to other AI systems, whether authority could eventually be granted to machines, whether liability can be insured and packaged, whether energy and compute remain binding, and whether human attention really matters in a world where AI agents increasingly talk to other AI agents.
Because if those objections defeat our thesis, we should know.
Yes, we are not looking for things AI can never touch. That is too easy to say and too difficult to defend. We are looking for constraints that do not disappear merely because intelligence becomes abundant.
And our billion-dollar acquisition gives us the first test.
It does. Imagine again that the AI has finished. The analysis is extraordinary. The cost of producing it is almost trivial. The recommendation flashes on the screen, buy.
Now somebody has to press the button.
And suddenly, the cheap part of the system ends. The facts have to be trusted. The authority has to exist. The capital has to move. The risk has to be accepted. And if the decision fails, the consequence has to land somewhere.
Intelligence produced the option. Reality sends the invoice.
That's the episode.
Almost. Because the really interesting part is what happens next. If AI keeps making one layer after another cheaper, the remaining constraints do not necessarily become less important. Some may become more valuable precisely because everything around them became abundant.
So where do we start?
By destroying the easiest answer. Before we decide what doesn't become cheap, we need to stop confusing today's human advantage with tomorrow's structural scarcity.
All right, let's destroy the easy answer. What doesn't become cheap? Creativity, empathy, strategy, judgment, human connection. Done. We can go home.
Except that list may be exactly the wrong way to think about the problem.
Because those are all things AI is already attacking.
Yes, and there is a pattern here that matters. Whenever technology moves into a new domain, we tend to draw a line around whatever humans still do better and declare that line permanent. Machines can calculate, but they will never understand language. Then language begins to fall. Fine, they can use language, but they will never create. Then image generation, music, software, design, and writing improve. Fine, they can create, but they will never reason strategically. Then models begin analyzing complex situations, comparing options, simulating outcomes, and coordinating multi-step work.
The mistake is turning the current frontier into a law of nature.
Exactly. We look at the boundary between humans and machines today and assume we have discovered something permanent about humans. Often we have only discovered where the technology currently stops.
So let's take the sacred cows one at a time. Creativity first.
Creativity is enormously valuable, but value and scarcity are different questions. If I can ask an AI system for 100 logo concepts, 50 product names, 20 advertising campaigns, 10 architectural directions, and 5 alternative endings to a story, then the cost of generating creative options has already changed.
Someone can still say, but the AI isn't truly creative.
They can, and that may be philosophically important, but economically, the customer may care more about whether the output is useful, original enough, emotionally effective, or commercially successful than about what internal experience produced it.
A scarcity thesis has to survive economic substitution. It is not enough to prove that human creativity and machine generation are metaphysically different. You have to show that the difference remains economically scarce.
That's a much higher bar.
Much higher. And the same problem appears with empathy. Humans genuinely care about other humans in a way we should not casually equate with software-generating empathetic language. But suppose the economic task is customer support. The customer is frustrated. The system listens patiently, remembers the history, never gets irritated, explains the problem clearly, and produces language the customer experiences as understanding.
It doesn't have to feel your frustration to solve the customer service problem.
Right. Genuine human connection may remain deeply important in our lives, but AI cannot truly feel empathy does not automatically create a durable economic moat around every job that currently uses empathy.
The same distinction matters in education, coaching, sales, care, negotiation, and management. The human relationship can matter enormously, while parts of the capability associated with that relationship become cheaper.
What about strategy? That feels harder.
It does, because strategy involves uncertainty, competitors, timing, incomplete information, and conflicting objectives. But think about what much strategic work actually contains: gathering information, finding patterns, comparing competitors, building scenarios, identifying risks, generating options, modeling second-order effects, stress testing assumptions.
Which sounds suspiciously like a list of things AI is getting better at.
Exactly. Maybe the CEO remains responsible for choosing the strategy, but that is already a different claim. We have moved from AI cannot do strategy toward someone must choose, authorize, and own the consequences of the strategy.
Which takes us away from capability and toward authority and accountability.
And that move is central to this episode. Every time we attack one of these supposed permanent human skills, we should ask whether the durable part is actually something else hiding underneath it.
Judgment seems like the strongest candidate. We say that one constantly. AI can give you the information, but humans provide judgment.
And there is something real there. But we have to be precise. If judgment means recognizing patterns across thousands of previous situations, estimating probabilities, comparing alternatives, or identifying which option historically produced better outcomes, AI can attack a lot of that.
So, saying judgment isn't enough.
No. We have to ask what remains after better prediction and better analysis. Imagine two options where the evidence is incomplete, the objectives conflict, and neither outcome can be known in advance. Someone has to choose. But now ask why that choice remains scarce. Is it because only a human brain can produce the correct answer? Or because there is no correct answer available and someone has to accept responsibility for choosing anyway?
That is a crucial distinction. Some of what we call judgment may be intelligence. The harder residual may be responsibility under uncertainty.
Judgment wearing an accountability jacket.
In some cases, yes. And that is much more defensible than saying humans possess some mysterious judgment faculty machines can never approach.
What about taste? That one has become popular. AI creates infinite things, but humans decide what's good.
Taste is interesting, but again, I would be careful. Some taste is deeply personal. Some comes from culture, identity, history, status, and community. But some of what we call taste is preference prediction. If a system knows what millions of people chose, what you personally chose, what you ignored, what you replayed, what you bought, what you returned, and how those preferences changed over time, it may become extremely good at predicting what you will consider good.
And recommendation systems have already demonstrated that preference selection itself can be partly automated.
So taste might remain important without remaining expensive.
Exactly. That sentence applies to many things in this episode. Something can remain important while becoming abundant. Intelligence remains important even if intelligence becomes cheap. Software remains important even if generating software becomes cheaper. Creativity can remain culturally central even if generating creative options becomes abundant.
Important is not the same as scarce.
Yes. And if we confuse those two, we will consistently look for value in the wrong place.
Expertise is another obvious example.
Right. For centuries, specialized knowledge was expensive, partly because acquiring it took years. You trained a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor, an accountant, a programmer, or an analyst because the knowledge had to live inside people. AI changes that economics. It doesn't mean expertise becomes worthless. It means access to many forms of expertise can become dramatically cheaper.
Which is basically the foundation of the whole coordination cost collapse series.
Exactly. If specialized intelligence remains expensive forever, the series doesn't work. We are explicitly exploring a world where increasingly capable intelligence becomes easier to access and coordinate. So it would be inconsistent to suddenly protect human expertise simply because we want something to remain scarce.
Okay, so creativity is vulnerable. Empathy, as an economic capability, is vulnerable. Strategy is vulnerable. Taste is vulnerable. Expertise is vulnerable. Generic judgment is vulnerable. What are we left with?
We are left with a better question. Instead of asking which human capability AI will never reproduce, ask whether the scarcity comes from capability at all.
That is the line between soft and hard scarcity.
Yes, let's define it carefully. A soft scarcity exists because something is currently difficult, expensive, slow, or technologically limited. Human expertise used to be difficult to reproduce. Software used to require large amounts of specialized human labor. High-quality illustration used to require scarce artistic labor. Those constraints can change when technology changes.
And hard scarcity?
Hard scarcity comes from a constraint that cannot be reduced simply by producing a smarter answer. Physical resources are the clearest example. There is only so much electricity available at a particular place and time. There are only so many advanced chips. There is only so much land in Manhattan. There are only 24 hours in a human day.
But not every hard scarcity is physical.
Exactly. Some are institutional. There can be 10 million people capable of analyzing a legal dispute, but only certain institutions have the authority to issue a binding judgment. There can be 1 million excellent medical recommendations, but the legal authority to prescribe treatment can still be restricted. There can be unlimited investment analysis, but ownership determines who actually controls the capital.
So capability can become abundant, while the right attached to that capability stays scarce.
Yes, and some scarcity comes from consequence. 1 million systems can recommend that you invest $1 billion. You still only have the $1 billion once. If you lose it, generating another recommendation does not reverse the loss.
Some scarcity is social. Reputation, legitimacy, trust, and relationships can depend on history and recognition by other people.
Right. You cannot simply declare yourself trusted. Trust has to exist in the mind of somebody else. You cannot unilaterally grant yourself legitimacy. Other actors or institutions have to recognize your standing.
Although AI can probably attack those too.
Absolutely, and we should attack them. AI systems may build reputations. They may accumulate verifiable track records. They may become more reliable than humans. Institutions may grant them formal authority. People may form meaningful relationships with them. Nothing in this episode gets a free pass just because it sounds human.
Which means hard scarcity does not necessarily mean permanent scarcity.
Correct. That distinction is important. We are not building a museum of things AI can never touch. A scarcity can be structural today and still be altered by law, technology, institutional design, or abundance elsewhere. What matters is understanding what creates the constraint.
So maybe hard doesn't mean impossible to change. It means you have to change something deeper than the model.
Exactly. Better model intelligence alone does not create more electricity. It does not automatically grant legal authority. It does not create capital to absorb a loss. It does not automatically make a claim true. It does not automatically cause another person to trust you. Those constraints require something beyond generating a better answer.
That gives us a useful test. If doubling AI intelligence automatically cuts the scarcity in half, it is probably a capability scarcity. If the constraint remains because it terminates in physics, law, ownership, consequence, biology, or social recognition, we need to look deeper.
I like that. So when somebody says human creativity will be the last moat, ask what happens if AI creativity becomes 10 times better.
Yes. Or if someone says judgment is the moat, ask which part of judgment. Prediction, pattern recognition, option generation, those may become cheaper. Responsibility for an irreversible choice, that is a different problem.
If they say empathy,
Ask whether the economic value comes from genuine shared feeling or from producing an interaction the other person experiences as helpful and understanding. Different problems.
strategy,
Separate generating the strategy from authorizing it, funding it, executing it in physical reality, and accepting the consequences.
In other words, decompose the supposed human moat until you find the actual constraint.
Exactly. That is what we are going to do throughout this episode. And once you start decomposing these claims, something surprising happens. Many of the strongest remaining scarcities are not glamorous human superpowers at all.
they're boring things like insurance, signatures, electricity, audits, licenses, and balance sheets.
Which is precisely why they may matter. The future often gets discussed through whatever technology can newly do. Economics often turns on whatever the technology still has to pass through.
The constraint can be less exciting than the capability and still control the system.
Yes, a spectacular AI model can generate 1 million lines of code. One unnoticed security flaw can still matter more than the other 999,999 lines. An AI can generate 1,000 acquisition strategies. The company still has one balance sheet. A system can produce unlimited medical recommendations. A real patient still has one body.
That last one makes the distinction very clear. Digital options can multiply. Physical consequences don't multiply in the same way.
Exactly. And now we are ready for the first major scarcity that survives our test. Because when generating plausible answers becomes extremely cheap, another activity can become more important rather than less.
Figuring out whether the answer is actually true.
Yes, and that brings us to the verification rebound.
So now we have the opposite problem. From the one people usually worry about, AI doesn't produce too little. It produces too much.
Exactly. Imagine that producing a high-quality first draft of almost anything becomes extremely cheap. A business plan, a contract, a software feature, a medical hypothesis, a financial model, a marketing campaign, a scientific proposal, a competitive analysis, a product design. Suddenly, the organization doesn't have 3 possible answers. It has 300.
Which sounds like abundance until you ask which 300 are correct.
Or safe, or useful, or internally consistent, or based on accurate data, or compatible with everything else the organization is doing.
So generation stops being the expensive part.
Potentially. And when that happens, verification can move toward the center of the economic system. We call this the verification rebound.
Define it simply.
When the cost of generating plausible output falls, the amount of output can rise dramatically. Even if verifying each individual output also becomes cheaper, the total amount of verification required can still increase because there is so much more to verify.
It is similar to a rebound effect. Greater efficiency lowers the cost of an activity, which can increase how much of that activity people consume.
So AI writes code 10 times faster. Great. But now the company produces 10 times more code.
Exactly. And that code still touches databases, customers, payments, permissions, infrastructure, and other software. If the cost of writing a feature falls dramatically, companies may build far more features. Now, testing, security, integration, monitoring, and validation can become relatively more important.
The bottleneck moves from can we build this to can we trust what we built?
Yes, and software is only one example. Imagine AI can generate 1,000 investment theses overnight. That sounds extraordinary, but you cannot invest your capital into all 1,000 without thinking. You need to know which assumptions are valid, which data is current, which risks were missed, and whether the apparent opportunity survives contact with reality.
Or science. AI can generate hypotheses faster than laboratories can test them.
Exactly. A model can propose a molecule in seconds. The physical world still gets a vote. Does the molecule behave as predicted? Is it toxic? Can it be manufactured? Does it survive a clinical trial? Intelligence can make the search process dramatically better, but empirical reality still has to answer.
That phrase matters. Reality still gets a vote.
Always. And this becomes especially important because generative systems are optimized to produce outputs. An output can be coherent, sophisticated, persuasive, and still be wrong.
Plausibility and truth are different variables.
Yes, that distinction existed long before AI. Humans produce plausible nonsense too, but AI changes the scale. A human can write a false report. AI can potentially generate millions of convincing claims, documents, images, videos, analyses, or messages at extremely low cost.
So the supply of believable things can explode faster than the supply of true things.
Potentially, yes. And when believable output becomes abundant, establishing ground truth can become more valuable.
Which gives us the first clear example of abundance manufacturing scarcity.
Exactly. Cheap generation does not merely leave verification behind. It can create more demand for verification.
Give me the strongest version.
Imagine 2 worlds. In the first world, producing a professional financial report costs $50,000. Because reports are expensive, relatively few are produced. In the second world, producing a professional-looking report costs almost nothing. Now, every employee, investor, vendor, customer, competitor, and automated agent can produce reports continuously.
We have solved the report shortage.
Completely. But now suppose your problem is deciding which report deserves your capital. The scarcity has moved.
The report itself is no longer the asset. Verified confidence in the report becomes the asset.
Exactly, and that applies far beyond documents. If AI can cheaply generate identities, messages, voices, images, websites, code, recommendations, research, and evidence, then authenticity becomes economically important.
Who actually sent this? Did this event happen? Is this customer real? Is this invoice legitimate? Does this citation exist? Did the software actually pass the test?
Right, and notice what is happening. We started with intelligence abundance. But abundance creates a new tax on the system. More things can now be produced than humans could ever manually inspect.
We could call that the verification tax.
Yes, but we should be careful. Verification itself is also becoming automated. This is where we need to attack our own thesis.
Because the obvious response is, fine, AI creates the work, and another AI checks it. Problem solved.
And sometimes that will be exactly right. AI can compare outputs against databases, it can run tests, it can check calculations, it can inspect code, it can search primary sources, it can compare multiple models, it can detect anomalies, it can monitor sensors. It can use formal verification in domains where correctness can be mathematically specified.
In some domains, automated verification may become better than human verification.
Absolutely, we should expect that. If the task is checking whether two enormous datasets reconcile, I would not assume a tired human with a spreadsheet remains the ideal verifier forever.
So does that destroy the verification rebound?
No, but it changes the claim. We are not saying verification must remain human. We are saying verification has to terminate somewhere.
At some point, the system needs a reference that is not merely another generated claim about the first generated claim.
Exactly. Suppose AI number 1 says the bridge design is safe. AI number 2 verifies the calculations. AI number 3 audits AI number 2. Excellent. But eventually the bridge is built. Steel has a real strength. Wind produces real forces. Concrete behaves physically. Cars drive across it.
Reality becomes the final verifier.
Yes, or take finance. 5 AI systems can independently agree that a company has $10 billion in cash. But if the bank account contains $2 billion, consensus among the models does not create the missing $8 billion.
Verification has to anchor to something outside the model loop.
Right. A bank record, a sensor, a physical test, a signed contract, a primary source, a cryptographic proof, an independent measurement, some trusted connection to reality.
And those anchors can be expensive.
Very expensive. Think about a clinical trial. The hypothesis can become cheaper. The statistical analysis can become cheaper. Patient recruitment, biological response, manufacturing quality, time, safety monitoring, and real-world evidence do not automatically become free.
Or an audit. AI may inspect transactions extremely efficiently, but the value of the audit depends on whether the underlying records correspond to real assets and real obligations.
Exactly. This is why ground truth is such a powerful residual scarcity. Intelligence can help us discover it. Intelligence can help us measure it. Intelligence can help us measure it. Intelligence can reduce the cost of checking it. But intelligence cannot make false facts true.
That's almost embarrassingly obvious when you say it like that.
The best constraints often are. They become invisible because we spend so much time looking at the spectacular new capability.
There is another problem, though. If AI becomes extremely good at verification, couldn't it filter the 1,000 reports down to the best 3 before I ever see them?
Yes, and that is probably what we want. The point of good orchestration is not to dump abundance onto the human, it is to compress it. Generate broadly, test aggressively, discard weak outputs, and escalate only what matters.
Which means the relevant metric is not how much raw AI output exists. It is how much unverified uncertainty reaches the consequential decision.
Exactly. If AI can reduce that uncertainty dramatically, verification becomes cheaper. But then we reach another question. Who decides what level of verification is enough?
Because verified is not always binary.
Right? Some things can be proven. 2 plus 2 equals 4. A program can satisfy a formal specification. A digital signature can be cryptographically valid, but many real-world decisions involve probabilities. Is this acquisition worth the risk? Is this patient likely to benefit? Is this supplier reliable enough? Is this building safe enough? Is this autonomous system ready for deployment?
Verification eventually meets risk tolerance.
Exactly. And risk tolerance is not simply a truth question. It is a consequence question.
Meaning, I can verify that there is a 5% chance of losing $1 billion. The verification doesn't tell me whether I should accept that risk.
Perfect. Now we are approaching the next scarcity. AI can improve the estimate. It can show the distribution. It can compare historical cases. It can simulate outcomes. But somebody or some institution has to decide whether the expected reward justifies the possible loss.
And if the loss occurs, the model doesn't erase it.
Right. This is where verification stops being the final bottleneck. Once we know enough to act, somebody has to stand behind the action.
Before we go there, I want to push one more thing. What happens when verification itself becomes a competitive weapon?
That could be enormous. If everybody can generate similar outputs, then the organization with better systems for establishing truth can move faster with less risk. Imagine 2 companies using equally capable AI. Company A generates 1,000 ideas and spends weeks arguing about which ones are trustworthy. Company B has automated tests, clean data, strong provenance, independent verification, clear confidence thresholds, and excellent escalation rules.
Same intelligence, different ability to trust the intelligence.
Exactly. The advantage shifts from raw generation toward the architecture that turns generated output into reliable action.
Which is another reason model benchmarks alone can miss where organizational value is moving.
Yes, a slightly weaker model inside an excellent verification system may produce more economic value than a stronger model inside a chaotic organization.
That connects directly back to episode 1. Coordination mattered because intelligence alone wasn't enough.
And now we are adding another layer. Coordination alone isn't enough either. You need confidence that the coordinated system is connected to reality.
Intelligence generates. Coordination organizes. Verification anchors.
And then somebody takes the risk.
Exactly. That sequence matters. Because as the first 3 become cheaper, the 4th can become more visible.
So cheap generation creates more things to verify. Better verification creates more things we're willing to act on. And more action creates more exposure to consequences.
Yes, that is the chain, and it means technological progress can solve one bottleneck while increasing pressure on the next.
Which is why abundance does not necessarily remove scarcity from the system. It can move scarcity downstream.
Exactly, and now imagine the most extreme version. AI generates the recommendation. AI verifies the data. AI runs the simulations. AI checks the legal documents. AI monitors the execution. Everything works beautifully. Then the system makes one consequential mistake.
Who pays?
That question takes us from verification into something even harder to automate away, not because AI can never participate in it, but because loss has to land somewhere.
The system needs a destination for consequence.
And that is the liability sink.
The liability sink sounds like something you would find underneath a nuclear reactor.
In a way, that is why I like the phrase, because it forces us to ask where the dangerous part eventually goes. We have spent decades improving systems that generate information. Now, AI is improving systems that generate decisions and increasingly actions. But every consequential action creates the possibility of a consequence that cannot simply be generated away.
Someone or something has to absorb the downside.
Exactly. Imagine an autonomous AI system managing part of a company's supply chain. It predicts demand, negotiates with suppliers, allocates inventory, schedules transportation, and adjusts orders continuously. Most of the time, it performs better than the old human process. Costs fall, delays fall, inventory improves. Then one day, it makes a catastrophic mistake and commits the company to $500 million of inventory nobody needs.
We can retrain the model, but the warehouses are still full.
Right. The error exists in physical and financial reality now. The company owes suppliers money. Inventory has been produced. Capital has been consumed. Maybe contracts have been signed. Maybe employees made decisions based on the system's outputs.
Intelligence can explain the failure. It cannot retroactively make the failure costless.
And that is the heart of the liability sink. As the cost of generating actions falls, the system still needs some entity capable of absorbing the consequences when those actions go wrong.
Usually the company.
Often, a corporation is actually a useful example because we already created institutional machinery for this problem. A company can own assets, sign contracts, borrow money, sue, be sued, buy insurance, pay damages, and go bankrupt.
Which means liability does not have to terminate in one individual human.
Correct. And this is where we need to be precise. It would be too strong to say AI can never carry liability because AI isn't human. Law changes. Corporate structures change. Insurance changes. We could eventually create legal entities whose operations are overwhelmingly controlled by autonomous systems.
Maybe an AI-run company has a bank account, insurance, capital reserves, and legally defined obligations.
Exactly. So the interesting claim is not that liability must remain human. The stronger claim is that liability must terminate somewhere.
A consequence needs a balance sheet.
Yes, suppose an AI-controlled company causes $100 million of damage. Maybe an insurer pays. Fine. Then the liability has moved to the insurer's balance sheet. Maybe the insurer spreads that risk across 10,000 customers. Fine. The risk has been distributed. It has not disappeared.
And if the loss is bigger than the insurance pool?
Then we discover the next layer. Shareholders lose capital. Creditors take losses. Assets are seized. Governments intervene. Victims absorb uncompensated damage. Somebody somewhere experiences the consequence.
Risk can be transferred, pooled, priced, securitized, or insured. But those are methods for allocating consequence, not abolishing it.
Exactly. That distinction matters enormously in an AI economy.
Because if AI creates much more action, we may also create much more need to decide where all that risk goes.
Yes. Imagine that today, one human manager authorizes 100 consequential decisions per month. Tomorrow, an AI system can make 100,000. Even if each decision is individually safer, the scale of activity can become enormous.
Which means total exposure can rise even while error rates fall.
Exactly. Suppose the human system makes errors 5% of the time and the AI system makes errors only 0.1% of the time. That sounds overwhelmingly safer. But if the AI system enables 1,000 times more actions, the organization still has to think carefully about aggregate exposure.
That's another rebound effect. Better decisions can create more decisions.
Yes, and this is why liability architecture may become more important, not less, as autonomy increases. Permissions, transaction limits, insurance, capital requirements, audit trails, escalation thresholds, reversibility, segmentation, kill switches. Who can authorize what? How much loss one autonomous system can create before a human or another control system intervenes.
In other words, the organization does not merely need intelligent agents. It needs a risk constitution for those agents.
I like that. A constitution for machine action.
Think about why companies already separate authority. A junior employee cannot normally wire $1 billion because they had a good idea. A trader has risk limits. A purchasing manager has spending limits. A bank has capital requirements. A nuclear facility has layers of authorization. A hospital has protocols. These structures exist because the cost of a wrong action can be radically larger than the cost of thinking about the action.
And AI doesn't remove that asymmetry. It can make it bigger.
Potentially. If thinking becomes almost free, action becomes the dangerous transition.
The boundary between recommendation and commitment becomes economically important.
Exactly. An AI can recommend purchasing a factory every second without buying anything. The moment one recommendation becomes a signed contract, the economic state of the world changes.
So there is a giant difference between a token and a transaction.
Yes. Between saying and binding. Between simulation and commitment. between predicting and owning the outcome.
Which is why cheap intelligence can coexist with expensive commitment.
And this is where capital enters the picture. Capital is not simply another form of intelligence. If I have $1 million and AI gives me 1,000 brilliant investments, I still cannot invest the same $1 million 1,000 times simultaneously without leverage or outside capital.
The ideas multiply faster than the balance sheet.
Exactly. AI can increase the number of attractive opportunities faster than it increases the resources available to pursue them. And every time capital is committed, somebody bears an opportunity cost. That money cannot be simultaneously committed somewhere else under the same conditions.
Unless the capital itself becomes more abundant.
Correct. And it can. Economic growth can create more capital. Financial systems can mobilize savings. Credit can expand purchasing power. AI can improve capital allocation. But none of that means the downside of an investment becomes fictional.
If I lose the money, I still lost the money.
Exactly. This gives us one of the simplest lines in the entire series. The decision gets cheaper. Being wrong does not.
That one should stay.
But there is an objection. If AI becomes much better at decisions, maybe being wrong becomes so rare that liability matters less.
That's the strongest challenge. Imagine AI systems become dramatically safer than humans. Autonomous vehicles crash far less often. Medical systems make fewer diagnostic errors. Financial systems detect risk earlier. Industrial systems prevent accidents. In that world, total damage could fall enormously.
Which sounds like the liability sink is shrinking.
It may shrink per decision, and that would be wonderful. But notice what hasn't changed. When the rare catastrophic failure occurs, we still need to know who bears it.
Low probability does not eliminate consequence.
Right, and in some systems, increased scale can create new forms of correlated risk. If one human makes a mistake, the damage may be local. If one widely deployed autonomous system contains a hidden failure mode, the same mistake could propagate across thousands or millions of decisions.
One brain fails once. One model can fail everywhere.
Potentially, yes. We should not assume that has to happen. Systems can be diversified, segmented, independently verified, and designed to fail locally. But that architecture becomes part of the value.
Because the important question becomes not only how intelligent the system is, but how much damage any one failure is allowed to create.
Exactly. That is a governance question built around consequence.
What about personal liability? Suppose an AI makes a medical recommendation and a doctor approves it without really understanding it. Who is responsible?
That is precisely the kind of institutional problem AI forces us to solve. If the doctor is merely clicking approve on decisions the AI actually makes, pretending the human is fully responsible may eventually become fiction. But removing the human signature doesn't solve the liability problem either. We need a new allocation. The hospital, the software provider, the insurer, the manufacturer, the operator, some combination.
And that allocation will affect incentives.
Enormously. If the AI developer bears every loss, innovation may slow or become prohibitively expensive. If the user bears every loss, providers may have too little incentive to build safe systems. If nobody bears meaningful loss, victims absorb the externality.
So liability isn't just punishment after something goes wrong. It shapes behavior before something goes wrong.
Exactly. Liability is an incentive architecture. It tells participants which risks they have reason to care about.
Which means making liability cheap could actually destroy useful discipline.
Yes, if you could take unlimited risks and always transfer the losses to somebody else, you would create moral hazard. That is why skin in the game matters economically. Not because humans are morally superior to machines, but because systems behave differently when decision makers are connected to consequences.
But an AI cannot feel financial pain.
True, but again, we do not need to make the argument depend on machine feelings. An AI-controlled entity can have constraints, lose enough capital, and it loses permission to operate, violate enough safety rules, and its license is revoked. Produce enough bad outcomes, and counterparties refuse to transact with it.
The system can face consequences without experiencing them emotionally.
Exactly. Economics does not require suffering. It requires constraints and incentives.
That is important because otherwise we fall back into the same trap from segment 2. Humans feel responsibility. Therefore, humans must always be responsible.
Right, we don't need that claim, we need the narrower one. Consequences have to connect to something the system cannot ignore. Capital, permissions, assets, access, legal status, reputation, operating rights.
Something scarce.
Exactly. If violating the rule costs nothing, it is not much of a constraint.
So the liability sink could eventually be mostly institutional rather than human.
Absolutely. Imagine an autonomous company with $1 billion of capital, strict regulatory permissions, mandatory insurance, transparent audit logs, and automated controls. It could potentially absorb responsibility for a huge amount of machine activity without a human approving every individual decision.
Which would actually help the coordination cost collapse go much further.
Yes, this is important. Residual scarcity is not necessarily an enemy of automation. Building institutions around that scarcity may be what allows automation to scale.
Just as limited liability helped humans coordinate capital at enormous scale.
Exactly. Institutional innovation can transform a constraint without eliminating the underlying reality. Corporations did not eliminate economic loss. They created structures for containing, allocating, and financing it. Insurance did not eliminate accidents. It created structures for pooling their financial consequences.
So maybe one of the biggest AI innovations won't be another model. It could be a new legal or financial wrapper around autonomous action.
Possibly, but we are going to save the consequences of that idea for later in the series. For now, we only need to see the structural point. Intelligence can become abundant. Action can become automated. Liability can be reorganized. But consequential systems still need somewhere for downside to terminate.
The liability sink.
Yes, and once we see that, another distinction becomes unavoidable. Because deciding who bears the consequences is not the same as deciding who is allowed to act in the first place.
Capability, consequence, and now permission.
Exactly. An AI might know what should be done. It might even be more likely to be right than the human. But that still leaves a separate question. Who gave it the right to make the decision binding?
Intelligence is not authority.
And that is where we go next.
So, let's make this uncomfortable. Imagine the AI is better than you. Not a little better, consistently better. It sees more information, remembers more history, catches more contradictions, models more outcomes, and makes fewer mistakes. Why shouldn't it make the decision?
Sometimes it probably should. But even then, we need to separate two questions that sound similar and are actually completely different. Can the AI make the decision? And does the AI have the right to make the decision?
Capability and authority.
Exactly. Intelligence is the ability to analyze the situation. Authority is the recognized power to make an outcome binding.
Give me the simplest example.
A courtroom. Imagine an AI system has read every relevant statute, every precedent, every filing, every piece of evidence, and every comparable judgment. Suppose, for the sake of the argument, that it predicts the legally correct outcome more accurately than the average human judge.
Then let it decide.
Maybe society eventually does. But today, producing an excellent legal analysis does not automatically make something a court. The judge possesses institutional authority that the analysis itself does not create.
The authority comes from a legal system that recognizes the office, defines its powers, limits those powers, provides appeal mechanisms, and ultimately enforces its decisions.
Exactly. The intelligence behind a decision and the legitimacy of the decision are different layers.
Same thing with our acquisition. The AI can say buy, but it doesn't automatically get access to the bank account.
Right. The board may have authority. The CEO may have delegated authority up to a certain threshold. Shareholders may need to approve particular transactions. Regulators may need to approve others. The answer can be obvious and still require authorization.
Which means authority can remain scarce even when analysis becomes abundant.
Yes, and this is one of the most important ideas in this episode because authority is not simply another intellectual capability. It is a relationship between an actor and a system that recognizes that actor's right to bind others.
You can't prompt your way into authority.
Not unless somebody with authority gives it to you.
That's a very different kind of scarcity.
Completely different. Imagine 1 million AI systems all produce the same recommendation. interest rates should fall. Their agreement does not automatically change the policy rate. Or 1 million systems conclude that a company should issue new shares. That does not itself issue the shares.
Information can influence authority without possessing authority.
Exactly. And the distinction exists everywhere. A navigation system can identify the fastest route. It does not necessarily have permission to drive the vehicle. An AI can identify suspicious financial activity. It does not automatically have the authority to freeze someone's bank account. An AI can recommend surgery. It does not automatically have permission to perform it.
Although every one of those boundaries can move.
And they probably will. That is essential to say. We should not turn today's permission structures into permanent laws. Autonomous vehicles can receive legal permission to drive. AI systems can receive authority to execute trades, purchase inventory, approve refunds, manage infrastructure, or make bounded operational decisions.
So, authority itself can be delegated.
Absolutely. Companies already delegate authority to software constantly. An algorithm does not call the CFO before every credit card transaction. A trading system can execute orders automatically. A cloud platform can allocate resources. Industrial control systems can change physical processes without waiting for a person to click approve.
Then why call authority scarce?
Because delegation does not abolish authority. It creates a chain of authority. Somebody or some institution defines what the system is allowed to do.
Permission has an origin.
Exactly. Suppose an AI agent can spend up to $10,000 without approval. Why 10,000? Why not 10 million? Someone established the boundary. If the agent can hire employees, sign contracts, or move capital, some legal and institutional framework recognizes those actions as binding.
So even if the machine receives enormous authority, there is still a governance layer deciding the scope of that authority.
Yes, and as AI systems become more capable, defining that scope could become one of the hardest organizational problems.
Because too little authority destroys the benefit of autonomy. Too much authority increases the potential consequence of failure.
Exactly. Imagine an AI procurement agent that needs human approval for every $50 purchase. You have automated almost nothing. Now imagine the same agent can sign unlimited contracts with any supplier in the world. You have solved the coordination problem by creating a potentially catastrophic risk problem.
So autonomy lives between useless permission and dangerous permission.
That's a good way to put it. The design problem is deciding how much authority can safely leave human attention.
Which connects directly to trustworthy delegation from episode 1.
Exactly. Trustworthy delegation was the threshold where responsibility could leave human attention and return completed at acceptable risk. But now we can see that delegation contains at least 3 separate questions. Is the agent capable? Is the agent authorized? And who is accountable for the outcome?
Capability, authority, accountability.
3 different layers. And treating them as one creates confusion.
There is also legitimacy.
Yes. Authority tells us who has the recognized power to decide. Legitimacy asks whether the people affected accept the basis of that power.
Isn't that basically the same thing?
Not always. A dictator can have enormous authority and weak legitimacy. A respected expert can have enormous legitimacy and little formal authority. A regulator can possess legal authority while losing public trust.
And an AI system could eventually have formal authority while people remain unwilling to accept its decisions.
Exactly. Imagine an AI system denying your mortgage. That already feels normal to many people. Now imagine an AI system sentencing you to prison.
Very different reaction.
Even if the AI statistically produces fairer and more consistent sentences than human judges, society may still ask whether a machine should possess that power.
Which means legitimacy cannot be reduced entirely to decision accuracy.
Right. People care about procedure, representation, consent, appeal, transparency, identity, values, whether the decision maker has the recognized standing to exercise power over them.
But let's attack that too. What if AI judges eventually prove dramatically fairer than humans? Fewer biases, fewer inconsistent sentences, better explanations, better adherence to law. Wouldn't legitimacy follow performance?
It might. That is a serious counter-argument. Legitimacy is not permanently reserved for biological humans. Institutions evolve. People already trust machines with decisions that previous generations would have considered extraordinary.
So again, the claim is not that AI can never possess legitimacy.
Correct. The claim is that legitimacy has to be socially conferred. Better intelligence alone does not automatically generate it.
Other people have to recognize your right to exercise the power.
Exactly, and that makes legitimacy relational. You cannot create it entirely inside the system claiming to possess it.
Similar to trust.
Very similar, an AI can behave in ways that deserve trust. It can build a track record. It can become more reliable than humans. But trust exists partly in the willingness of another actor to rely on it.
So there are scarcities that live between entities, not inside them.
Yes, that is another category worth remembering. Intelligence can exist inside an agent. Authority, legitimacy, and trust often exist in relationships between agents and institutions.
Which makes them harder to scale by simply copying the model.
Exactly. If you copy a powerful model 1 million times, you may create 1 million capable agents. You do not automatically create 1 million judges, 1 million licensed banks, 1 million trusted brands, or 1 million institutions with the right to command resources.
That is a very clean difference. Intelligence can be copied. Institutional standing cannot necessarily be copied with it.
Yes, and that could become economically important as AI capability spreads. If everyone has access to extraordinary analytical power, the scarce element may increasingly be the recognized right to turn analysis into action.
But that right can also be automated through rules.
Absolutely. Imagine a company creates an AI treasury agent. It can move up to $1 million between approved accounts, hedge specified currency exposure, and purchase approved securities within predefined risk limits. The authority is real. The AI acts without human approval each time.
So we've actually made authority scalable.
We have made a bounded form of authority scalable, and that may be one of the keys to AI-native organizations. But look at what remains scarce. Who defines the limits? Who can change them? Who decides which objectives the treasury agent should optimize? What happens when two objectives conflict? Who responds when the system encounters a situation outside its mandate?
Authority becomes hierarchical rather than disappearing.
Or constitutional. You can delegate enormous operational authority while retaining scarce authority over the rules themselves.
That sounds a lot like what happens in companies already.
Exactly. A CEO does not personally approve every invoice. The organization delegates authority through policies, roles, budgets, systems, and reporting lines. AI can compress much of that structure. But compression does not mean there are no boundaries.
It may make the boundaries more important because fewer humans are continuously watching the activity inside them.
Yes, if 1,000 autonomous agents operate inside an organization, you cannot supervise every action manually. The architecture of authority has to do more work.
Which means one human decision about the rules could govern millions of machine decisions underneath it.
Exactly. And now notice what happened to human attention. We removed humans from thousands of routine approvals, but the remaining human decisions became more leveraged.
A small amount of scarce authority can govern an enormous amount of abundant intelligence.
Yes, that is the pattern we keep finding. Abundance does not necessarily eliminate the remaining constraint. It can increase the amount of activity controlled by that constraint.
So the CEO of the future may approve fewer individual decisions, while each decision about the system matters more.
Potentially. Instead of approving transactions, the executive defines the boundaries inside which transactions can happen automatically. Instead of reviewing every output, they determine confidence thresholds. Instead of assigning every task, they define objectives and escalation conditions.
The unit of management moves upward.
Exactly, from actions toward systems.
Which sounds powerful until you get the system-level decision wrong.
And then the mistake can propagate through everything underneath it. That is why authority and accountability cannot be separated for long. The more leverage an authority decision has, the more important its consequences become.
The right to decide becomes more valuable when one decision controls more productive complexity.
Yes, and this is where we need to resist jumping ahead to episode 3. We are not yet asking who captures that value or who gains power. We are simply identifying the scarcity.
The scarcity is not necessarily intelligence. It may be legitimate, accountable authority over systems that contain enormous intelligence.
Exactly, and that is much harder to commoditize than generating another recommendation.
But there is something even harder than institutional authority.
Physics?
Physics, because eventually every digital system that matters economically has to touch the physical world somewhere. The AI can generate the perfect plan, the institution can authorize it, the capital can be committed. But somebody still has to produce the electricity, manufacture the chip, build the factory, move the material, or wait for the biological process to happen.
Intelligence can move at machine speed. Reality has its own clock.
And that is where we go next.
Physics is a terrible business partner. It doesn't care how persuasive your PowerPoint is.
Or how intelligent your AI is. And this is where the story of digital abundance runs into something stubborn. Intelligence can move incredibly quickly through a digital system. A model can generate a design in seconds. An agent can coordinate a workflow in milliseconds. Software can be copied almost instantly. But eventually, if the objective involves the physical world, something has to happen in physical reality.
Electrons have to move. Materials have to be transformed. Machines have to be built. Energy has to be supplied.
Exactly. Think about the AI infrastructure itself. We often talk about artificial intelligence as though it exists in an abstract cloud. But the cloud is very physical. Data centers occupy land. Servers contain chips. Chips require fabrication plants. Fabrication plants require extraordinary machinery, materials, water, energy, logistics, and capital.
Intelligence may feel weightless when it appears on your screen. The infrastructure behind it definitely isn't.
Right, and as demand for intelligence grows, those physical layers can become more important. If everyone wants dramatically more compute, the constraint may not be whether we know how to build another AI application. It may be whether power is available at the right location, whether the grid connection exists, whether transformers can be delivered, whether advanced chips are available, whether cooling can be supplied, whether construction can happen fast enough.
Digital demand can grow faster than physical infrastructure.
And that gives us another residual scarcity. Not because physical constraints never improve, they improve constantly, but because intelligence and physical abundance follow different cost curves.
So if AI becomes 100 times better, we don't automatically get 100 times more electricity.
Exactly. Better AI may help us create more electricity. It can optimize grids, design better reactors, improve solar systems, discover materials, forecast demand, reduce waste, and accelerate engineering. But the improvement still has to become physical. A new power plant does not appear because the model generated the blueprint faster.
Permits still have to be issued. Equipment still has to be manufactured. Construction still takes time.
Yes, and this distinction applies far beyond energy. Imagine AI designs the perfect factory. Excellent. You still need land, machines, materials, workers or robots, permits, supply chains, and time.
AI designs the perfect house.
You still need concrete, steel, timber, land, labor, equipment, and permission to build it.
AI designs the perfect battery.
You still have to manufacture it at scale, source the materials, prove its safety, build the production system, and integrate it into real products.
AI discovers a promising drug.
Biology still runs the experiment. The body still responds according to chemistry and physiology rather than according to the confidence of the model. Manufacturing still has to work. Safety still has to be established. Time still passes during trials.
So intelligence can compress the search. It cannot always compress the world at the same rate.
Exactly. That may be the cleanest formulation. Intelligence can move faster than reality.
Although even that needs qualification. AI can accelerate reality indirectly through better automation, robotics, logistics, and engineering.
Absolutely. We should not make physical scarcity sound static. Imagine autonomous construction equipment operating around the clock. AI-designed factories built from standardized modules, robotics reducing labor constraints, better energy systems, automated laboratories running experiments continuously. All of that can make physical execution much faster and cheaper.
So physics isn't saying no. It's setting the terms.
Exactly. Physics is not a permanent excuse for slow progress. It is simply the layer where the answer has to become real.
And some constraints can become more binding precisely because intelligence improved.
Yes, suppose AI makes designing new products almost free. Companies generate 10 times more commercially viable product ideas. What happens next? Demand for prototypes, manufacturing capacity, testing, logistics, energy, and capital can increase.
Another abundance creates scarcity effect.
Exactly. The design bottleneck falls and pressure moves downstream.
Similar to verification. Cheap generation increases demand for checking. Cheap design can increase demand for building.
And this is why the phrase AI makes everything cheap is misleading. AI can dramatically reduce the intelligence component inside many goods and services, while increasing demand against the components that remain physically constrained.
Let's make that concrete with something everyone understands. Housing.
Good example. Imagine AI reduces architectural design costs by 95%. It optimizes layouts, energy use, structural engineering, materials, procurement, and scheduling. That could make housing cheaper. But if the main constraint in a particular city is scarce permitted land, the cost of land does not disappear because architectural intelligence became cheap.
In fact, better and cheaper construction could increase demand for the scarce land.
Exactly. The falling cost of one input can increase the value of another input that cannot expand as quickly.
That's basically the whole episode in miniature.
It is, and we can apply it to compute itself. Suppose algorithms become dramatically more efficient. One unit of compute produces 10 times more intelligence. The simple prediction is that compute demand falls.
But cheaper, effective intelligence could cause us to use vastly more intelligence.
Exactly. We may put AI into every company, every workflow, every device, every scientific process, every robot, every vehicle, every industrial system. Efficiency can reduce the compute required per task while total compute demand still rises because the number of tasks explodes.
So, even making compute cheaper doesn't guarantee compute stops being scarce.
Correct. The system responds. Lower prices create new uses. New uses create new demand.
And physical infrastructure has lead times.
That's important. Software can scale extremely quickly once it works. Physical systems often cannot. You can copy software to 1 million users far faster than you can build 1 million houses, 1 million robots, 1 million transformers, or 1 million advanced manufacturing tools.
Which creates a speed mismatch between the digital layer and the physical layer.
Yes, and that mismatch can become one of the defining features of an AI-accelerated economy. Ideas, plans, designs, and decisions move faster. Physical capacity becomes the cue.
Time itself becomes part of the scarcity.
Exactly. Some processes have irreducible or difficult to reduce time components. Concrete cures, crops grow, clinical outcomes emerge, factories are commissioned, infrastructure is permitted and constructed, relationships develop, legal processes run.
AI can work 24 hours a day. A tree still grows like a tree.
Right, and that sounds trivial until an economy filled with machine-speed decision-making begins pushing against human-speed institutions and physical speed systems.
Then latency becomes economic.
Very economic. If an AI can identify a valuable infrastructure investment in 10 seconds, but connecting that infrastructure to the grid takes 4 years, the intelligence was not the dominant constraint.
The expensive part moved from knowing what to do to being able to do it.
Exactly, and this is why we need to distinguish between the information required to transform the world and the physical capacity to perform the transformation.
There is also scarcity in location.
Yes, physical resources are not merely finite. They are geographically specific. Electricity available in one region does not automatically solve a power shortage somewhere else. A data center needs power where the data center is. A factory needs logistics where the factory is. A mine exists where geology placed the resource.
And the best piece of land in a city cannot be copied like software.
Exactly. Digital goods can often be replicated. Rival physical assets cannot. If you occupy the land, I cannot simultaneously occupy the same land in the same way.
Which brings ownership back into the picture.
It does. If a resource remains scarce, rights over that resource matter. Who owns the land? Who controls the energy? Who has access to the compute? Who holds the permit? Who owns the factory?
We are getting dangerously close to episode 3.
We are. So we stop there. We are not yet asking who benefits economically from controlling scarce physical assets. We are only identifying why those assets can remain scarce even when intelligence around them becomes abundant.
And why the scarcity may become more visible as intelligence costs fall.
Exactly. Imagine the total cost of producing something has 5 components: intelligence, coordination, capital, materials, and energy. If AI dramatically reduces the first 2, the remaining 3 become a larger share of the total.
Even if their absolute cost doesn't increase.
Correct. Relative scarcity matters. Something can become more economically important without becoming physically rarer.
And if demand rises because the first 2 inputs became cheap, the remaining inputs can become more expensive in absolute terms as well.
Yes, that is the stronger version. AI can reveal the bottleneck, and then increased activity can push harder against it.
Which means the AI revolution could sometimes look strangely non-digital. More power plants, more transmission lines, more factories, more robots, more cooling, more chips, more construction.
Potentially, if intelligence becomes abundant, the question becomes what abundant intelligence wants to act upon.
And every action eventually consumes or rearranges something real.
Exactly. Even a purely digital business rests on physical infrastructure somewhere. Servers run, networks transmit, devices consume energy. Humans consume time.
So the cloud eventually hits the ground.
Always.
But we should distinguish physical scarcity from another constraint that is biological rather than industrial.
Human attention.
Which seems strange because episode 1 was about removing human attention from coordination.
Exactly. And that is what makes the next step interesting. If AI successfully removes humans from most routine coordination, human attention does not necessarily become irrelevant. It may become concentrated into a much smaller number of decisions where each minute matters enormously.
The quantity of human involvement falls while the leverage of the remaining involvement rises.
Yes, and that may be one of the most important consequences of the coordination cost collapse.
Let's bring back the company from episode 1. 1 human, 50 AI specialists, research, finance, legal, product, marketing, engineering, operations, strategy.
But this time, let's assume the coordination system actually works. Not perfectly today, but imagine increasingly capable orchestration that can assign tasks, preserve context, resolve routine conflicts, verify outputs, and escalate only the exceptions that matter.
Then most coordination no longer needs continuous human attention.
Exactly, and that sounds like human attention should become less important.
Which is what we wanted. If the founder still spends all day answering 50 AI employees, we haven't solved much.
Right, but removing routine coordination reveals something underneath it. The human is no longer spending attention on everything. Attention becomes concentrated on a much smaller number of decisions.
And those decisions may be disproportionately consequential.
Imagine the system handles 10,000 routine decisions without intervention. Then it escalates one. The legal agent has identified a strategy that appears technically compliant, but may violate the spirit of a regulation.
That's not an information routing problem anymore.
No. Or the finance agents identify an acquisition with enormous expected upside, but a small probability of threatening the company's survival. Or the product system discovers that maximizing engagement conflicts with customer well-being. Or several strategy agents disagree because the outcome depends on a geopolitical event nobody can predict reliably.
The routine work disappeared into automation. What reached the human was the residual uncertainty.
Exactly, and that gives us a better way to think about scarce attention, not as a permanent claim that humans must always make important decisions, but as an escalation resource.
So what gets escalated?
Think about 3 variables: uncertainty, consequence, and reversibility.
Low uncertainty, low consequence, easily reversible, strong candidate for automation.
Refund $20. Reorder a standard component. Reschedule a routine workflow. If the system is reliable, consuming executive attention there makes little sense.
Now turn all three knobs the other way.
High uncertainty, enormous consequence, difficult to reverse.
Acquire the company. Shut the factory. Launch the drug. Enter a new country.
Exactly. Those are the places where attention can remain expensive because a small number of decisions can dominate the outcome of the entire system.
So automation can reduce the quantity of human involvement while increasing the leverage of whatever involvement remains.
Yes, and that distinction matters. Suppose an executive currently spends 40 hours a week managing an organization. 30 hours disappear into information transfer, status checking, routine approvals, and coordination. 10 hours involve genuinely consequential decisions.
AI removes most of the 30.
Then the organization may be able to scale dramatically without requiring proportionally more executive attention. But those remaining 10 hours are no longer ordinary management time. They may govern far more activity than before.
Scarcity plus leverage.
Exactly. 1 hour of attention can sit above thousands or eventually millions of machine actions.
Which means choosing what reaches that hour becomes incredibly important.
That's the real design problem. If every AI agent can interrupt the human whenever it encounters uncertainty, the human becomes the bottleneck again.
50 AI employees, all with notifications turned on. We reinvented Slack.
Exactly. So advanced orchestration needs something more sophisticated than task routing. It needs attention routing.
Which disagreement matters? Which uncertainty is material? Which risk exceeds the threshold? Which action is irreversible enough to justify interruption?
Yes, the system has to compress enormous amounts of machine activity into a tiny number of human-relevant exceptions.
And if it escalates too much?
Human attention collapses under the load.
Too little?
Consequential failures pass unnoticed.
So the quality of escalation becomes part of the quality of the entire autonomous system.
Exactly. And there is an important warning here. Simply putting a human in the loop does not solve this problem.
Because sometimes the human is only there to make everyone feel better.
Right. Imagine an AI system makes 10,000 decisions per second and suddenly gives a person 3 seconds to approve an emergency action they barely understand. Technically, there is a human in the loop. Functionally, there may not be meaningful human governance at all.
Oversight has to respect actual human cognitive limits.
Yes, humans have limited working memory. We get tired. We lose context. We cannot meaningfully evaluate thousands of complex exceptions simultaneously.
And automation can make that problem stranger. Because the human may see only the weirdest cases.
Exactly. Aviation gives us a useful warning. Highly automated systems can handle routine operation extremely well. But if humans intervene only during rare, abnormal situations, those can be precisely the moments when the human has the least context and the highest stakes.
The system cannot merely decide when to escalate. It has to preserve enough context for the escalation to be useful.
That's crucial. A good escalation system does not throw 1,000 pages at the human and say, "You decide." It compresses the problem without hiding the uncertainty. It explains why the exception matters, what assumptions are unstable, what could go wrong, and which options remain reversible.
So the scarce resource isn't just attention. It's usable attention.
Exactly. Attention with enough context to make a meaningful decision.
But I want to push harder against this whole argument. Why assume even that stays human?
There we go.
If AI becomes better at identifying exceptions, modeling uncertainty, balancing objectives, and choosing under risk, then the system can automate the escalation too. What looks like scarce human judgment today may simply be another temporary capability gap.
I agree, and that's why we should not build the episode around the claim that human attention is permanently protected.
Then are we deleting it from the scarcity list?
No, because there are two different claims. The weak claim is that important decisions will always require a biological human. I don't think we can defend that confidently.
And the stronger claim?
Consequential systems need some mechanism for allocating scarce decision capacity to unresolved uncertainty, conflicting objectives, and exceptions. Today, much of that capacity terminates in human attention. AI can push that boundary outward. But wherever the unresolved decision finally terminates, that decision channel can remain scarce relative to the enormous volume of possibilities underneath it.
So human attention is one current form of something deeper.
Exactly. Scarce trusted decision capacity.
That is stronger than saying humans stay in charge forever.
Much stronger. And it also helps us understand attention outside the company.
The market version.
Yes, imagine AI makes high-quality content almost free. Articles, videos, music, research, advertising, personalized messages. Every company can generate more material than any human could consume in a lifetime.
Production becomes abundant while consumption remains bounded.
You cannot watch 10 million excellent videos today. You cannot read a million brilliant reports. You cannot build relationships with everyone who wants 5 minutes of your time.
So cheap content doesn't create cheap attention.
Correct. It can do the opposite. The more abundant, credible content becomes, the more valuable selection can become.
Filters, reputation, provenance, trusted intermediaries.
Exactly. But now apply our own method against that claim. AI assistants can filter the abundance too.
My AI reads the million reports, so I don't have to.
Right. Then the constraint moves again. The company may no longer need to win your attention directly. It may need to convince your AI intermediary that its signal deserves escalation.
Which turns attention scarcity into a routing and trust problem.
Yes. What does your agent trust? Which sources have credible provenance? Which relationships receive priority? Which claims deserve verification? Which message crosses the threshold into your awareness?
So even when AI protects my attention, somebody is still competing for access to the decision channel.
Exactly. And that is why I would broaden this fifth scarcity beyond human attention alone.
Trusted access.
Trusted access to scarce decision channels. Sometimes that channel is a human executive, sometimes a customer, sometimes a regulator. Eventually, it may be another AI system acting on someone's behalf.
That's cleaner. It doesn't depend on humans staying at the center forever.
Right, and it connects attention to something deeper. Trust.
Because abundance increases the number of signals asking to be believed.
Exactly. If everyone can produce a polished argument, polish becomes less informative. If everyone can generate personalized outreach, personalization becomes less differentiating. If everyone can produce sophisticated analysis, the existence of analysis itself stops proving much.
The scarce thing becomes getting through the filter.
And getting through for a reason the receiving system considers trustworthy. Track record, provenance, incentive alignment, reputation, verified performance, institutional standing, relationships.
All of which can themselves be partially automated.
Absolutely. Machine-native reputation systems may emerge. Agents may verify one another. Provenance can improve. Trust can become more measurable. But again, we follow the constraint rather than declaring any current mechanism permanent.
Which means this segment started with human attention and ended somewhere bigger.
Yes, human attention is scarce today because human cognition is finite. But the more durable concept is trusted access to whatever decision channel still controls consequential action.
And as intelligence becomes abundant, more signals compete for that access.
Exactly. That is the pattern we have now seen repeatedly. Cheap generation can increase demand for verification. Cheap decision-making can increase exposure to consequence. Autonomous capability can make authority more important. Digital abundance can push against physical capacity, and abundant signals can increase competition for trusted access.
Which sounds less like 5 unrelated scarcities and more like one recurring pattern.
It is, and now we are ready to name it.
Abundance does not merely remove constraints. It can create pressure against the next one.
Exactly. Abundance casts a shadow, and that shadow is where we go next.
So maybe the title of this episode has been misleading us.
A little. We started by asking, what doesn't become cheap? That sounds as though the economy contains a fixed collection of scarce things. AI makes most of them abundant, and eventually we discover whatever is left at the bottom.
But that isn't what we have found.
No, we have found something more dynamic. When one constraint becomes cheap, behavior changes, production changes, demand changes, organizations change, and those changes can increase pressure somewhere else.
So scarcity doesn't just survive abundance. Abundance can create scarcity.
Exactly, and I think we can now state the deeper principle underneath this entire episode. Abundance casts a shadow.
Meaning?
Make one valuable input dramatically cheaper, and the system reorganizes around that abundance. People use more of it. Companies build around it. New products become viable. Activities that were previously too expensive suddenly happen at enormous scale. And then pressure moves toward whatever complementary input did not become cheap at the same rate.
The bottleneck moves.
Yes, and sometimes the new bottleneck becomes more economically important than it was before.
Let's run the chain again, but this time as one system.
Start with generation. AI makes producing plausible intellectual output cheaper. Analysis, code, design, strategies, research, content, recommendations.
Output explodes.
And when output explodes, the question shifts from, can we produce something, toward which output should we trust?
Verification becomes scarce.
Then verification improves. AI checks AI, tests become automated, provenance improves, systems become more reliable, more outputs become trustworthy enough to act upon.
Which means more actions become possible.
Exactly. And once action scales, exposure to consequence scales with it. Now we need limits, insurance, capital, accountability, and someplace for downside to terminate.
The liability sink.
Then suppose we solve much of that too. We build excellent insurance systems, autonomous corporate structures, risk limits, audit trails, and machine-readable regulation. AI systems can safely act without waiting for a human every time.
Then authority becomes the next design problem.
Who can commit which resources, under which conditions? Who defines the objectives? Which decisions can be delegated? Which powers can be revoked? What happens when autonomous systems disagree?
And if we solve that,
More activity becomes autonomous, which means fewer routine decisions consume human attention. But the remaining human decisions can govern vastly more activity.
Human attention becomes more leveraged.
And all of that machine activity still runs somewhere. Compute consumes power. Robots consume materials. Factories occupy land. Infrastructure takes time. Biology operates under physical constraints.
so digital abundance pushes harder against physical reality.
Exactly. This is not a straight line toward a world with no scarcity. It is a sequence of moving constraints.
Which suggests a more general economic rule. The value of a complementary input can rise when another input becomes abundant.
Yes, imagine a restaurant where chefs are incredibly expensive but tables are cheap. Then somebody invents technology that makes world-class cooking almost free. What happens?
We open more restaurants.
Maybe. And if demand explodes, suddenly prime locations, permits, ingredients, distribution, reputation, or customer attention may become the limiting factors.
The value did not disappear. It migrated through the production system.
Exactly. Now replace chefs with intelligence.
That's the AI economy.
Potentially. Intelligence has historically been one of the most expensive inputs in the economy. We spent years educating people. Companies paid enormous salaries for specialized expertise. Organizations were built partly around moving scarce knowledge between scarce human brains.
If that input becomes dramatically cheaper, the entire production function can reorganize.
Yes, and that means asking whether AI replaces a particular job may be much less interesting than asking which complementary inputs become binding after intelligence gets cheaper.
That's a big shift. Instead of asking, does AI replace the lawyer? Ask, if legal analysis becomes abundant, what becomes scarce around legal analysis?
Exactly. Maybe verified facts, maybe recognized authority, maybe client trust, maybe courtroom access, maybe accountability, maybe the willingness to put a professional license behind the advice.
And those answers can change over time.
Absolutely. We should expect them to. If AI later makes verification cheap, then follow the constraint again. If institutions make machine authority abundant, follow the constraint again. If energy becomes dramatically cheaper, follow the constraint again.
So this isn't really a prediction about which 5 things stay expensive forever.
No, that would contradict the whole method. This is a way of thinking about technological change.
Never confuse the current bottleneck with the permanent bottleneck.
Exactly, and never assume removing a bottleneck removes the economic value associated with scarcity. Often, it transfers that value toward the next constraint.
Let's take content because that's already happening in front of us.
Good example. Suppose producing competent written content becomes almost free. The old scarce input was production. You needed writers, editors, designers, production teams. Now one person can produce far more.
So content becomes abundant.
Then what becomes scarce? Human attention, trusted distribution, reputation, authenticity, maybe community, maybe the ability to prove that something deserves 5 minutes of someone's finite day.
And AI can attack those constraints too.
Exactly. Personal agents can filter content. Recommendation systems can improve. Reputation can become machine readable. Verification can become automated.
Then the bottleneck moves again.
Yes, maybe access to trusted filters becomes important. Maybe control over the recommendation layer matters. Maybe relationships become more valuable. We don't need to decide that here. The method tells us what to watch.
Follow the constraint.
Now consider software. If generating code becomes cheap, companies can build far more software.
Then testing, integration, security, and deciding what should be built become more important.
Exactly. If AI makes those cheap too, companies build even more systems. Then maybe access to customers, proprietary workflows, reliable data, regulatory permission, or organizational ability to deploy change becomes the constraint.
Every solved problem reveals another layer.
Yes, and there is no reason to view that pessimistically. Moving bottlenecks are what progress looks like.
Explain that. Because there will always be scarcity can sound like nothing really improves.
But enormous improvement can happen. Imagine food production becomes 100 times more efficient. People can be vastly better off even though beachfront land remains scarce. Eliminating one scarcity can transform living standards without eliminating every scarcity.
Economic abundance and residual scarcity can coexist.
Exactly. AI could make intelligence, education, software, analysis, entertainment, design, and many services radically cheaper. That would be extraordinary. The fact that other constraints remain does not diminish that achievement,
It just tells us where the next fight happens.
right? And where the next opportunity, risk, and concentration of value may emerge.
Which is where episode 3 will eventually go.
Yes, but not yet. For now, there is another important implication of the abundance scarcity law.
Which is,
The next scarcity can become more valuable even if its supply does not decrease.
that's counterintuitive.
Imagine there are 100 units of verified human attention available today and 100 units tomorrow. Supply hasn't changed. But tomorrow, AI systems generate 1,000 times more potentially valuable decisions, competing for those same 100 units.
Attention became relatively scarcer.
Exactly. Or imagine a region has the same amount of electricity, but AI makes 20 new data center projects economically attractive. Electricity becomes more valuable because demand against the fixed supply increased.
Same power. More things wanting power.
Right. Scarcity is relational. It depends on supply relative to demand.
Which means technological abundance in one layer can increase scarcity in another without destroying a single unit of the scarce resource.
Exactly. That is why AI abundance can have effects that look paradoxical. Intelligence gets cheaper, but certain experts become more valuable. Content gets cheaper, but trusted brands become more valuable. Software gets cheaper, but cybersecurity becomes more valuable. Decisions get cheaper, but accountability becomes more valuable.
Though we should be careful with those predictions.
Very careful. None of those outcomes is guaranteed. If supply of the complementary resource expands quickly enough, its price can fall too. The point is not that every remaining input must become more expensive. The point is that you cannot infer its future value merely from the falling price of intelligence.
You have to model the whole system response.
Exactly. What becomes cheaper? How much additional demand does that create? Which complementary resources can scale? Which cannot? How quickly can institutions adapt? Where does risk accumulate? Where does authority terminate?
This is starting to sound like a framework investors could use.
It could be, but again, episode 3.
You're not letting me have any fun.
I'm protecting the trilogy.
There is another implication worth preserving here. Abundance can create scarcity not only through demand, but through noise.
Yes, that is crucial. Suppose AI produces 1 million scientific hypotheses. Even if 10,000 are brilliant, finding those 10,000 becomes a problem. Suppose AI creates a billion pieces of content. Even if 1 million are exceptional, discovering them becomes difficult.
More good things can actually make selection harder.
Exactly. Abundance increases the search space that can increase the value of ranking, filtering, reputation, provenance, and verification.
So abundance can manufacture scarcity through at least two mechanisms: demand pressure and selection pressure.
Yes. Demand pressure means cheap input. A causes us to demand more of complementary input B. Selection pressure means abundance of A makes identifying the valuable subset of A harder.
And AI can help solve both.
Of course, which again moves the constraint. This is not a static model.
There may also be a third mechanism: consequence multiplication.
Good. If cheap intelligence enables far more autonomous actions, even low-risk actions can create significant aggregate exposure. That increases the importance of systems that contain failure.
So, demand pressure, selection pressure, consequence multiplication.
3 ways abundance can create or intensify another scarcity.
And together they explain why a world of abundant intelligence can still contain extremely valuable bottlenecks.
Exactly. Which finally allows us to answer the title of this episode more carefully. What doesn't become cheap?
Not a list of magical human abilities.
No, we need something stronger. We need to group the residual constraints by what actually creates their scarcity.
Truth, consequence, authority, reality, attention, and trust.
5 families. Not because they are guaranteed to remain scarce forever, but because making intelligence cheaper does not automatically make any of them cheap.
So let's put the whole map on the table. So now we have the pattern. Abundance casts a shadow. Make one important input dramatically cheaper, and pressure moves toward whatever the system still needs but cannot expand as quickly.
Exactly, and that lets us put the 5 residual scarcities on the table without pretending they are 5 permanent walls that AI can never cross.
Ground truth, consequence bearing capacity, legitimate authority, physical capacity, trusted access.
But we've already explored all 5, so rather than explain them again, let's ask a harder question. Are these actually the same kind of scarcity?
No, and that distinction matters.
Some constraints arise because intelligence eventually encounters reality. Others arise because humans and institutions have designed systems that allocate responsibility, permission, trust, and risk in particular ways.
Exactly. I would divide the map into 2 broad families, not as perfect categories, but as a useful distinction.
What are they?
Reality constraints and institutional constraints.
Start with reality.
Ground truth and physical capacity belong most clearly here. Suppose 10 AI systems unanimously conclude that a factory produced 15,000 units yesterday. If the factory actually produced 12,000, reality does not negotiate.
Model agreement is not ground truth.
Right, better AI can improve our estimates, better sensors can improve measurement, cryptographic systems can improve provenance, automated experiments can improve verification. But those systems are valuable precisely because there remains a difference between a representation of reality and reality itself.
10 confident models don't manufacture the missing 3,000 units.
Exactly.
Physical capacity has the same property.
AI can design a data center in seconds. The data center still requires chips, power, cooling, construction, land, transmission infrastructure, permits, and time. AI can discover a promising molecule. Biology still has to respond. AI can optimize a factory. Materials still have to move through physical space.
Intelligence can compress the path to the answer without automatically compressing the physical world at the same rate.
Exactly. That does not make physical scarcity permanent either. Better technology can expand energy production, robotics can expand manufacturing, material science can reduce resource requirements. Infrastructure can scale.
But something physically has to happen.
Yes, reality constraints can move dramatically, but they cannot be eliminated merely by generating a better prediction about them.
So those are closest to what we might call fundamental floors.
With an important qualification: not fixed prices, not fixed quantities, and not permanent bottlenecks. A physical constraint can become economically irrelevant if supply expands enough. The structural point is simply that information about reality and reality itself are not identical.
Then we have the second family.
Consequence-bearing capacity, authority, and much of trusted access are different. These are deeply shaped by institutions.
Meaning we invented a lot of the rules.
Exactly. A corporation can authorize a CEO to spend $100 million. A government can authorize an agency to issue a license. An insurance contract can transfer risk. A court can recognize responsibility. A financial system can decide what collateral is acceptable. A market can decide which reputation mechanisms it trusts.
Those constraints are real, but their architecture is socially constructed.
Yes, and that makes them potentially much more redesignable than they first appear.
Which creates a problem for our thesis.
A very important one.
Because maybe we're just looking at today's institutions and calling their limitations structural.
That is the strongest objection to the entire episode.
I think so. Let's state it as strongly as possible.
Go for it.
Maybe none of these residual scarcities is especially durable. Maybe they are simply the current frontier of automation plus institutional lag. Verification becomes cheap through better sensors and AI checking systems. Liability becomes cheap through automated insurance and risk markets. Authority gets delegated to machines once they outperform humans reliably. Machine-native reputation systems reduce trust costs. Robotics, energy technology, and materials science attack physical bottlenecks.
In that view, today's hard scarcity is simply tomorrow's engineering problem.
Exactly. And if that's true, perhaps this entire episode is just moving the word scarcity one step ahead of whatever AI can currently automate.
That's a serious objection.
It is, and I don't think the right response is to insist that our 5 categories are permanent.
Because the episode itself has already rejected permanent boundaries.
Exactly. If we respond by saying, no, these 5 things can never become cheap, we would make the same mistake we criticized when people say creativity, empathy, strategy, or judgment will always belong to humans.
So what's the answer?
The answer is that the 5-item list is not the deepest thesis.
Follow the constraint is
Exactly. Suppose verification becomes nearly free. Excellent. Don't defend verification as permanently scarce. Ask what cheap verification enables,
More decisions we're willing to trust.
which can enable more autonomous action. Then ask what that increased action requires. Perhaps insurance, capital, authority, energy, physical infrastructure. Something else we haven't identified yet.
and if those become cheap,
Follow the constraint again.
So the framework wins, even if the list loses.
Exactly. In fact, the list should lose eventually if technological progress is strong enough.
that's an important distinction.
Very important. A useful framework should not depend on freezing today's bottlenecks forever.
Then maybe the 5 residual scarcities aren't predictions.
They're a map of the current structural frontier. They tell us where abundant intelligence appears likely to encounter constraints that intelligence alone does not automatically remove.
And the map is allowed to change.
It has to change.
That actually makes the thesis stronger.
I think it does, because now we can separate 2 questions people often confuse.
Which 2?
First, what is scarce today? Second, what mechanism creates the scarcity?
The second question is more durable.
Exactly. If verification is scarce because high-quality evidence is expensive, automate evidence collection and the scarcity may collapse. If authority is scarce because law restricts who can act, change the law and the scarcity may move. If energy is scarce because generation cannot meet demand, expand generation.
But then something happens because people respond to the cheaper resource.
Right. That's where the abundance scarcity law matters.
Abundance changes behavior.
Exactly. If intelligence becomes 100 times cheaper, we do not simply produce the same amount of intelligence for 1% of the cost and go home.
We use more of it.
We create products that previously made no economic sense. We analyze decisions that previously went unanalyzed. We personalize services that were previously standardized. We deploy agents into workflows that previously could not justify the labor. We generate more options, more experiments, more transactions, more software, more content, more decisions.
The system reorganizes around the abundance.
And that reorganization puts pressure on complementary resources.
Which gives us the three mechanisms from the previous segment.
Demand pressure, selection pressure, consequence multiplication.
Demand pressure. Abundant intelligence increases demand for something complementary.
More data centers increase demand for power. More AI-designed products increase demand for manufacturing. More opportunities increase demand for capital.
Selection pressure.
Abundance increases the number of possibilities we must rank. 1,000,000 good pieces of content can make finding the exceptional one harder. 10,000 plausible strategies can increase the value of identifying which one deserves action.
Consequence multiplication.
Cheap intelligence can generate and execute vastly more decisions. Even if each decision becomes individually safer, the aggregate amount of activity exposed to error can rise.
So we need a name for the whole thing, not just the mechanisms.
We already have one.
Abundance casts a shadow.
Exactly, and I would call the underlying mechanism the abundance scarcity law.
When an important input becomes dramatically cheaper, the system expands its use until pressure shifts toward another constraint.
That's the core idea, not a literal law of physics, a forecasting heuristic.
And follow the constraint is how you use it.
Yes, the abundance scarcity law describes the pattern. Follow the constraint is the method.
That's clean.
Let's test it against the billion-dollar acquisition one last time.
The AI analysis becomes nearly free. So companies analyze far more acquisitions, investments, contracts, and strategic options.
Intelligence, abundance.
Then verification improves. More opportunities become credible enough to consider seriously.
But the company still can't buy every company.
Exactly. Capital becomes a constraint. Risk capacity becomes a constraint. Authority becomes a constraint. Management attention may become a constraint. Regulatory approval may become a constraint.
And if AI and institutions reduce those constraints too, transaction volume can rise again until another constraint appears.
Exactly. There is no reason the chain has to stop at the 5 categories we identified.
Which means we're not trying to predict the final bottleneck of civilization.
Thankfully,
We're trying to build a better question.
yes. When you see AI make something cheap, don't stop at the abundance. Ask what the abundance does to the rest of the system.
What becomes abundant?
What does that abundance increase demand for?
And where does the next constraint appear?
That's the framework.
And now something important follows from it. If economic value tends to migrate toward constraints, then following scarcity may also tell us where power moves.
Who owns the bottleneck?
Who controls the capital, the energy, the trusted channel, the infrastructure, the authority?
Exactly, but that's the line we stop at today.
Because that's episode 3.
Yes, this episode had one job: show why abundant intelligence does not imply the end of scarcity, and give us a method for finding what matters after a constraint falls.
The 5 scarcities are the current map.
The abundance scarcity law explains why the map changes.
And follow the constraint tells us where to look next. So let's return to where we began. A billion-dollar acquisition. An AI system that can perform extraordinary analysis for a fraction of what that intelligence once cost.
And after everything we've explored, the important question is no longer whether the AI can produce the recommendation. Assume it can.
The question is what the recommendation still needs before it can become reality.
Exactly. Are the underlying facts trustworthy? Is there capital available? Who has authority to commit it? Where does the downside land? Can the transaction actually be executed?
The recommendation can become almost free. The $1 billion doesn't.
And that captures the central lesson of this episode. When one important input becomes dramatically cheaper, don't assume the value simply disappears. Look at what the new abundance puts pressure on next.
Abundance casts a shadow.
Yes, and the mechanism underneath that idea is what we've called the abundance scarcity law. When an important input becomes dramatically cheaper, the system expands its use, reorganizes around the abundance, and begins pushing against another constraint.
More intelligence creates more things worth analyzing. More generation creates more things worth checking. More trustworthy decisions create more things worth acting on. More autonomous action creates more consequence.
Exactly. Demand pressure, selection pressure, consequence multiplication.
And none of that requires today's bottlenecks to remain tomorrow's bottlenecks.
That's crucial. The 5 residual scarcities we identified are a map, not a prophecy. Ground truth, consequence-bearing capacity, legitimate authority, physical capacity, trusted access.
AI can attack every one of them.
And if it does, good. We don't defend the old constraint. We follow the new one.
Follow the constraint.
That is the method I want you to remember from this episode.
Not what is the last thing AI can never do.
No. That question tempts us to build permanent conclusions around temporary capability gaps.
Ask instead, what became abundant?
What does that abundance increase demand for?
And where does the next constraint appear?
3 questions.
And you can keep asking them as technology improves. If verification becomes cheap, follow the constraint. If machine authority becomes normal, follow the constraint. If energy becomes dramatically cheaper, follow the constraint. If AI systems can manage almost every routine exception without humans, follow the constraint.
The map changes. The method survives.
Exactly. And that is why the coordination cost collapse is larger than a story about fewer managers or smaller companies.
Episode 1 changed the cost of organizing intelligence.
And this episode followed that intelligence until it encountered things. Intelligence alone does not automatically create truth, permission, risk capacity, physical execution, trusted access.
Connection to reality.
Yes, intelligence generates possibilities. But economic systems ultimately have to convert possibilities into consequences.
Which brings us back to one line that probably summarizes half the episode.
The decision gets cheaper. Being wrong does not.
And as decisions become cheaper, there can be many more opportunities to be right or wrong.
Exactly. That is consequence multiplication. Abundant intelligence can increase the volume of consequential activity the economy is capable of producing.
Which means the future isn't simply humans doing less. It can be the entire system doing more.
Much more. More experiments, more products, more companies, more strategies, more transactions, more personalized services, more autonomous decisions.
And therefore more pressure against whatever cannot scale at the same rate.
That is the shadow cast by abundance.
And now we can finally see why this matters, beyond the intellectual framework.
Yes. Because if activity expands until it encounters a constraint, then the constraint may become economically important.
And whoever controls that constraint may gain leverage.
The power plants, the capital, the trusted distribution, the infrastructure, the permissions, the scarce assets.
Maybe. But notice what we just did. We crossed from scarcity into value capture.
Episode 3.
Exactly. And we should stop here rather than steal its argument.
Episode 1 asked what happens when coordination becomes cheap.
Episode 2 asked what doesn't become cheap automatically.
And episode 3 asks the dangerous question.
Who controls what remains scarce?
And therefore, who captures the value when the bottleneck moves?
That's where we go next.
But if you remember only one framework from today, remember this. Don't predict the future by staring only at what AI makes abundant.
Look at the shadow.
Find the complementary resource that cannot expand as quickly. Understand why it is constrained. Then ask whether technology, institutions, or markets can remove that constraint too.
And when they do,
Follow the constraint again.
Because the bottleneck moves.
And sometimes the bottleneck tells you more about the structure of the future economy than the technology that removed the previous one.
abundance casts a shadow.
Follow the constraint.
See you in episode 3. If you found this episode helpful, here's what you can do. Subscribe to AI Frontier, AI on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Follow us on X to stay updated on the most important AI shifts, and share this episode with a friend. Help us reach 10,000 downloads. Help us keep this series in business. This podcast is part of Finance Frontier AI. We run 4 different series: AI Frontier, AI, Finance Frontier, Mindset Frontier AI, and Make Money. If your company or idea fits one of our themes, visit our pitch page. You might qualify for a free spotlight.
You can also sign up for the 10X Edge. It's our weekly drop of real AI use cases, smart model moves, and early signals, all explained in plain language. No hype, no jargon, only at financefrontierai.com. And if you have a story to tell, maybe a breakthrough product, an early signal, or a bold thesis, head to our pitch page. If it's a clear win-win, we'll pitch it for free. This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not financial advice, legal advice, or development guidance. Always verify before you act.
The AI landscape changes fast. Benchmarks shift. Models update. Regulations evolve. Use this show as your map, but not your final answer.
Today's intro and outro track is Night Runner by Audionautics, licensed under the YouTube Audio Library license.
Copyright 2026. Finance Frontier AI. All rights reserved. Reuse or distribution of this episode without written permission is not allowed. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
AI host mapping. Sophia is powered by ChatGPT. Max is powered by Grok. Charlie is powered by Gemini.